you asked somebody recently, how was your day? Or how did it go? And they went, well, and they got about 6 inches shorter, and their face went from this to this, and they started changing the tenor of their voice a little bit, and then they began to complain and complain and complain. And then when you stepped in and said, well, at least it didn't do this, or at least it didn't do that, they came up with a whole bunch more complaints. You probably know people like that who complain as their default response. They are folks that you think of as complainers. Maybe you think of them as whiners even, or people who have a little more active way of complaining. They call that venting, which is complaining with a righteous cause, right? How does it feel when you're around folks like that? Do you want to help? Most of the time, probably just get away from them. Maybe that's what happens. Well, there's something that we have learned over the years that I want to share with you about the art of complaining. Especially if, let's turn this around, if I'm actually talking about you. Maybe you're a person who tends to complain. Now, you know you're a person who tends to complain because people tell you. You're kind of complaining a lot. They tell you that. Or another way you know you're a complainer is because you're complaining in your head all the time. As you know from some of the other videos we've shared with you, you and I have got an inner narrator. That inner narrator is our own voice that narrates our life around us and talks about ourselves and other people all the time. That inner narrator is a pretty powerful indicator of whether or not you and I are optimistic or pessimistic. And a pretty powerful indicator of whether or not you and I are a complainer or a whiner or a venter. So do you find yourself complaining in your own head a lot? Because if you do a lot, you can't really contain that very well. At some point, it will start to leak its way out so that other people see it as well and hear it as well. So if you're a complainer, I want to show you how to not be a complainer, the kind of complainer especially that people just don't want to be around. They don't want to listen to you. Maybe you have found yourself being labeled as the no person because you have a certain way of complaining or a certain way of talking about things that are not working the way you want them to. Here's a couple ideas that we've learned. So whether you're a complainer or whether you work with somebody who's a complainer, I think this will help a little bit. Here's the idea. Complaining is actually not the same thing as whining and venting. Complaining actually, when I have a complaint about something, it's actually not all that easy to do, especially in the workplace. I can't just randomly start complaining because when I do, people are going to turn back to me and say, what do you think we should do about it? That's different than whining. A person who whines or who vents doesn't have any desire to be engaged in the solution. But a complainer actually does, because complaining is a sign of commitment. The fact that I would have this difficult conversation with you, who I think can do something about the problem, is actually difficult. To find the right person, to say it in the right way, to make sure that what I'm frustrated about is something maybe we could do something about, that's actually quite difficult. The reason I would overcome those social barriers, the reason I would overcome time barriers and emotional barriers and the chance of being rejected and criticized by people, and complaining in the process of doing that, is because I care a lot. Now, it's hard for you, perhaps, if you've listened to someone complain, to remember that the fact that they are doing that, even when they don't do it very elegantly, and even when they're frustrated in the process, is actually a sign of their commitment. Remind yourself of that and assume good intent that fuels the complaint. It's hard to actually remember that because sometimes, often, because the complaint is brought to you, it feels very personal. At the very least, it feels like it's a complaint about something that you care about personally. It may not have to do with you, but it has to do with your work or with one of your ideas. So remember that right out of the gate, when someone goes to the effort to complain, even if they do it poorly, assume good intent and Assume that they're doing so because they're actually committed. Now, they may not be committed to exactly the same outcome or exactly the same process that you are, but they're probably committed to something that you could, on its face, say, yeah, I think that's probably worth it. Complaining is a sign of commitment. Remember that as well. If you are someone who complains, you're probably nodding right now as you're listening to this or watching this video. Yeah, I care a lot. That's why I complain about things, because I want to see it better. And I don't know if anyone sees it. I got this. You're probably saying, I got it. It is a sign of commitment. But it's possible that if you've done this for a while and you haven't gotten anywhere and you ramp up your complaints a little bit more, that you have started to become labeled as a person who is an Eeyore or Negative Ned or Negative Nancy. And then as soon as you come down the hallway or as soon as you walk into this space, people have this filter over the top of you of a person who's negative. And as soon as you suck air in a meeting and you start with the word, well, they turn you off right away because they know that what follows is going to be negative and a complaint. Well, let's see if we can fix that pretty quickly. Since you know that complaining is a sign of commitment, and since you know that people around you are learning how to assume good intent, you can help them with that as well. How can you complain, not whine, which is just to make noise and sound like a complaint, but have no desire whatsoever to be engaged in the solution? To whine, to whine, to whine. It's blaming with a nasal tone. Or to vent, same kind of thing. You just want to express yourself and rehearse how negative you are and self-justify. That's venting, very destructive. We talked about that in an earlier video as well. You're not whining, you're not venting. You actually have a complaint. You want to see something fixed. How can you do that in a way that it actually makes a difference? Here is one of the first ideas. Answer for yourself before you even open your mouth and start complaining. What problem am I trying to solve? Understand that the problem you're feeling is probably not the problem that needs to be solved. Understand that right away. The second thing you need to be able to understand is what is the context in which this thing I'm complaining about lives, because you know that unless you understand the age in which that problem lives, you cannot understand the problem. Unless you understand the context in which that complaint resides, that a solution needs to be crafted or created, you cannot understand the problem. So take a deep breath and understand the complexity of the thing you're complaining about. It isn't just we need to change the temperature in the room. There is a bunch more to it. It isn't just that thing where you think it's a simple solution. If it was a simple solution, it would have already been done. So it's much more complex than you might give it credit for. So take a minute, pause, think about it, connect it, and see the context in which it lives. Then ask yourself the question, now that I know what problem I'm trying to solve, and that I'm complaining about, and now that I know that there are some complexities around this that I didn't at first see, now I need to ask, who's the right person that I'm going to talk with about this? Never complain to the wrong person, because you will make them crazy, and that's how you get the reputation of being a whiner and a moaner and a complainer. Always find out who the right person is. Well, who's the right person? It's the person who has the authority to say, yes, let's do something about this. That is also very likely the person who has the context. So you can learn from them. You can see the sea in which that thing swims. That person has the authority and they have the context. So also when you're going to come to the right person with the right problem to solve with the right context, then you're going to ask, is this the right time? Timing is a big, big deal. I want to make sure that that person is open to what I have to say to them and what I have to ask. So is now the right time? If it is the week before Christmas and the person has been working 12-hour days to try to get a bunch of stuff done so they could take 2 weeks off, and they're just about ready to go out the door, they've got 30 minutes left and they're getting things done, and you finally swing by their space and say, got a minute? Guaranteed, it's not the right time. By the way, it doesn't take a minute to complain the way you're supposed to. It takes a good half an hour. So don't say, got a minute? It'll drive people absolutely crazy. You might as well just say, got a minute? Because I'm going to take that and all the rest of your day too. All right? So, right person, right context, right problem, right time. Is now the right time? How do you know if it's the right time? How do you know? Right, you know exactly how you know. Ask them. And don't say, hey, you got a minute? I want to talk about something. And leave it mysterious. That's mean. Don't do that. Say, I would like to talk about this problem. When would be a good time to talk about it? Leave it up to them when it's a good time. If they say to you, never, well, that's probably not a good answer. You're going to be a little more tenacious than that. But you can say, I'd like to talk with you about this problem, and I have an idea about how we could solve it, and when would be a good time to talk about it. And then give them the respect that they deserve to pick the time when you're going to have that conversation with them. It's a pretty big deal. Their mind will be open if you do that. Even if it's just 2 hours later, their mind will be much more open than if you say, I want to talk about something. And then you just kind of leave it hanging in space. Icky, 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 to use a clinical term. It's just icky. All right, so then you want to complain with the right perspective. Here's the perspective. This problem has been around for a while, so you're not going to solve it instantly. That's part of the perspective. And it took several people doing a bunch of things, or several people ignoring a bunch of things, for this problem about which you're complaining to come to life. And then you lived with it for a while, and now you're frustrated enough that you came up with an idea to fix it. Do not have the perspective that you can come in there and hit one keystroke or wave a wand or do an I Dream of Jeannie thing, and all of a sudden it's going to go away. It isn't. Now, it'll probably go away or be solved faster than it was created, but not 1/100th of the time that it took to create. It'll take a while. You got to turn that ship around just a little bit. So have the right perspective that this is probably going to take some time. And then add one more thing to it. Give it the right effort. Because if you come by and complain about something, but you're not willing to get in and roll up your sleeves and change something about yourself in order to solve that problem, in order to address that complaint, you're not complaining. You're whining or you're venting. If you're not willing to carry part of the water, then you can't talk about how thirsty everybody is. It's really important. Make sure your perspective is, we can solve this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to help in some way. That is how you address being a really effective problem solver, not somebody who is just labeled as some kind of negative complainer, somebody who whines all the time. And we don't want you to have that kind of reputation. Here's another quick idea just as we wrap up here. If you find yourself in a setting and you've got that complaint mind that you've trained yourself that kind of comes across with, no, that's not going to work. Train yourself to start, anytime you notice that, where you want to say no, well, that's wrong, to start with this word. Yeah, okay, yes. And then follow up with a question. Even if inside your mind is screaming, no, not just no, but hell no, even though that's happening, make sure your face says, yes, okay, and then follow up with a question. I wonder, if we were to do that, how could we do it so that, and then present the problem, so that we don't stretch our staffing further than it already is stretched, so that we don't break the budget, so that we don't have to stop this project halfway through and take these wonderful people off of that and put it on this one. You bet, yeah, that might be a great idea. How could we do it if, then pose a question? That will get people really, really engaged. If people start getting emotional, frustrated, angry, then back off a little bit and come back again later when they're actually a little bit more calm and a little bit more open to it. All right? There you go. I don't want you to be a complainer. I don't want people to look at you and go, here she comes, and then shut the garage door of their brain. I don't want them to look at you and say, here he is. He's in this meeting. Every time he sucks air, the thing that comes out of it is toxic waste. We don't want that for you. We want you to be able to take that amazing brain, that massive cranium that you've got, and focus it on solving and on creating, not on being the person who's perceived by others as negative and not able to engage. There you go. Well, I'll tell you something that's not negative. This is not negative. This is great stuff. I'm going to have a sip, and then I'll probably end my day. Take care.